Welcome back to 20 Life Learners. Our speaker for today is recent UCT Chemical Engineering graduate Mike Thomson. Mike will be taking us through his challenging experiences with social anxiety. He will show us how an anxious body leads to anxious behavior, as well as highlighting that social anxiety is not just about crowds, but can also manifest itself with the people we care about the most. His message is one of hope, sprinkled in with some practical advice on how to deal with social anxiety while still remaining vulnerable and honest with yourself.
So I remember a time about midway through high school where I had a particularly bad bout of social anxiety, asking the question whether I'd ever be able to sit with people that I cared about, engaging with them, and actually feeling like I was present and I wasn't awkward and I didn't have inhibitions. And I really feared that I'd go my whole life without ever reaching that point. And I want to just start this presentation by just saying if there's anyone out there that is watching, either in this group or online, who is suffering from social anxiety, I hope that the message that I give across in this presentation is one of hope, that you can eventually reach the point where you can actually sit down with the people that you care about, the people that are very close to you, and truly enjoy just conversing with them and engaging with them. So if you had asked someone 5 to 10 years ago how they'd describe me, their response would probably be quite similar to how they'd describe me now. And that would be with words that are typical of someone that's extroverted: energetic, enthusiastic, comfortable, charismatic, those sorts of words. Um, and currently, I'll describe myself probably with some of those words as well. But the key difference between then and now is that if you had asked me to genuinely describe myself 5 to 10 years ago and how I felt emotionally, the words would have been closer to anxious, awkward, isolated, uncomfortable when speaking to people, and I think most importantly, quite unhappy. Um, and this was because of social anxiety. I remember the first time that I really experienced social anxiety. It was in grade 8. We had to stand up in front of our houses, in front of the matrics and the senior students, and we had to introduce ourselves. I remember standing up as this timid little boy, looking at all of these eyes around me, and for the first time really experienced what I came to know as like a neurosis of social anxiety. I started itching all over my body. That was closely followed by profuse sweating. I started stuttering through words. I started struggling to say sentences, put together thoughts, and I stuttered my way through my whole introduction and sat down. And at the time, I thought it was just nerves. But the key difference was that when I sat down again, those feelings didn't go away. They stayed. And over the months and years, they just got worse and worse and worse whenever I socialized with people. I started to come to know what I call now my anxious body. So my physiological response to socializing with people. So whenever I socialize with people, even if they were incredibly close to me, I mean, I'm talking about family members and really close friends, I started experiencing things like profuse sweating, compulsive itching. I actually got nicknames out of it. People that were close to me used to call me Pitmeister after my armpits and the fact that they were always sweating. Um, I started getting body odor because of the fact that I was always sweating. One of my more poignant memories was standing outside a class once, and there was a kid that was in my grade who I felt particularly anxious around, and he came up to me in front of everyone, smelt me, and just went, "Thomson, you stink. You smell truly stiff." And everyone was just jeering and laughing afterwards, and it just made the feelings of anxiety far, far worse. I struggled to hold eye contact with people. I stuttered through most of what I said, and these things just got worse and worse. And because it's all relating to confidence, it's self-fulfilling, right? It's a vicious cycle of negative traits. So anxious body led to anxious behavior, and I'd really group it into two major categories. And if you are watching this, you may identify with some of these things. So there was social isolation and symptoms hiding. So in terms of isolation, I started avoiding social events more often than not. In fact, if I was invited to parties, I wouldn't even RSVP because that stressed me out quite a lot. I avoided messaging people. I didn't like to read messages, and that's something that I've slowly dealt with. I dissolved into gaming. It became an escape. In fact, when friends came to my house, I remember people starting to say, like, "Why are we gaming so much? Why can't we engage?" And it was actually because I feared talking to people when they came over. I feared entertaining people. Something that was particularly tough was that I struggled to have one-on-one contact with people. In early romantic relationships that I had in high school, I actually never had coffees with my girlfriends because I was so afraid of actually engaging just with someone for an extended period of time, one on one. And something else that I did was block out people. I tried to avoid conversations. So a good example was when I queued outside classes in about grade 9, I would always wear headphones. So people couldn't start conversations with me on their terms because I was so afraid of the uncertainty of conversation. And I had a really good teacher at the time, Mr. Court, who in one of my reports reported that I was doing okay at school, but he was really concerned that I was acting like I was isolated and I was not engaging with people. Then there was the symptom hiding. So I was what you would call a extroverted anxious person. So I'd have really intense moments of incredible energy, but then I'd also try and hide all of my symptoms. I wasn't strong enough yet to be vulnerable in the fact that I was anxious. So I'd wear 2 shirts to cover my sweat stains. I became obsessed with my smell. I had a huge cologne collection at great cost because I wanted to mask my smell. Um, Whenever there were social occasions, I'd take 5 to 8 bathroom breaks. I couldn't be in a conversation for too long before I started feeling very anxious, and I had to go and breathe in the bathroom to calm down. And that was particularly tough when it came to hosting people at our house. So family friends that I respect and have known my whole life, I would have to retreat from when I was in my own home. Um, and then the biggest thing was I completely overcompensated with energy. So people would think that I was always happy. They were confused why I was so happy, why I had so much energy when moments were pretty mundane, and weren't sure why exactly this happened. But obviously you can't maintain that 24/7. So where I was happy, there were often moments just as balanced where I would be very removed. Um, and so people thought in those moments that I was aloof and arrogant, and I quickly earned the label fake at school, which is such a dangerous label to have because anything exciting that you do is deemed to be a facade, and anything that you do which is negative is deemed to be the real you. And that's something that a lot of people actually go through. And so I had an anxious mind. My self-esteem dropped, and I felt more and more hopeless and less confident. And I started to question if I was actually fake, and it was really quite a struggle until eventually I went to my dad and I asked him in a moment of pretty much desperation, Dad, am I going to be like this my whole life? Am I going to feel awkward when I speak to people? Am I going to struggle to maintain eye contact? Am I going to fear just being around friends? Is this something that I'm going to be stuck with forever? And I don't think he knew at the time how much I was feeling anxiety. And so his response was just a fair general response, and that is that adults also feel awkward. And you can control the level of awkwardness you feel by working on things that you do when you socialize. And that was the biggest point that he had. And it set me on a journey of trying to overcome this thing that I deemed awkwardness at the time. So I decided enough is enough. It was my subconscious decision. It wasn't a single moment. This makes it seem a bit over dramatic, but it was a subconscious thought. And I became obsessed with trying to be more confident in the way that I socialized with people so that I could finally enjoy socializing. And so here are some tips. Here are some things that got me through. And I've reached the point now where I can completely enjoy socializing with people. And so I hope that some of these help. The first thing, and this is something that's applicable to anyone because the human condition is a social one, is building social skills incredibly actively, deliberately. I did this through reading and watching people, especially. In terms of reading, my gospel became a book by Barbara and Alan Pease called A Definitive Guide to Body Language. It's been taken with me wherever I go for years now. And it's this thick book with pictures of people doing things, all of their body languages and what it means in terms of their thoughts. And their pages falling out of it. I've read it so much. And the reason I read it was I wanted to understand why it was that people acted in certain ways. And I wanted to be able to pick out the positive things that they were doing when they're around me. Were they actually engaged? Were they actually interested in what I had to say? Did I make them feel comfortable when I was speaking to them? And because I was reinforcing the positivity, it really helped me feel more confident. And then there was also the aspect of wanting to control how I behaved. How could I feel more confident? How could I feel more assertive? How could I feel that I was open? And I learned that all from a book. Then there was, in later years, a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think Tamir actually introduced me to the book, but it talks about how to build very sincere relationships with people. And that book was fundamental in helping me feel like I was confident in relationships. And it flipped it in a way that instead of focusing on myself, I was focusing on making other people feel more comfortable when they were speaking to me and at social situations. Then in terms of watching, I became obsessed with role models that I saw as charismatic people that made other people feel good. My biggest example and my savior when it came to this was Barack Obama. In fact, I wasn't very creative. But I'll just watch countless speeches by Barack. I'd watch all of his engagements with people, his interviews, and I'll try and emulate as much of what he did in the social interactions that I had, um, in a way that was sincere, right? If there are things that just didn't fit, I wouldn't do them. But if I felt like I could slowly start working on them, then I'd introduce them into the way that I socialized. Then there are other YouTube channels like Charisma on Command that I'd highly recommend. But essentially, I started viewing a lot of things that I watched within the context of trying to understand how people engaged in a normal way that was conducive to really connecting as human beings. Um, and then I just practiced them over and over again, right? When I was meeting strangers, I'd work on specific things that I was thinking about. A very specific thing was I used to feel very uncomfortable about handshakes. I used to be thrown off when I met people and someone reached out their hand. There would be that awkward moment of trying to decide how to shake their hand. And so I became obsessed with trying to work out how to do that in a confident way, and overcame that. But yeah, it was about practicing those social skills. I won't spend too long on this, but this is also important. Managing the body and mind. It's amazing how much chemistry just affects your highs and your lows. Exercise and sleep were two of the biggest ones. I found that I struggled to sleep when I was feeling particularly anxious. And then I found that exercise was the solution. I spent a lot of time in the gym trying to just tire myself out. And by the time I got to bed, I had endorphins in me, and I felt like I could sleep far more easily. Um, I also limited sugar and caffeine and simple carbohydrate intake, because I found that, as my mom had warned, I had these huge sugar lows after I consumed these things, and it made me feel more anxious. And then in terms of breath and meditation, I did that in later years when studying engineering. But Abdullah spoke about this in his presentation. I'd highly recommend it. And he has a fantastic blog, Hawk Offbeat, where you can read all about breathing and meditation. So a massive part of me overcoming social anxiety was finding a break. It's very easy when most of us are suffering these sorts of things to get caught up in an environment and get deeper and deeper into that environment and let it dictate the way that we feel. For me, my saving grace was going on exchange. I went to a school overseas, and it was a very progressive school. And there was a great community of people and LGBT people that were the most accepting, most understanding people that I'd ever met. And they made me feel like they actually cared about who I was, and I could completely redefine how I engaged with people. And by the time I got back to my school, which was my trigger, I felt removed. I felt like I had context. I no longer felt like every small response that people had to my behavior was dictating the way that I felt. So it was a huge step forward in terms of overcoming these things. And I know that everyone doesn't have the opportunity to go on exchange. I know that that's a very rare thing, but there are other ways of finding that escape, right? It's about finding communities of people that make you feel accepted and loved. From some people that I've spoken to, it can also be medication. It can for a moment just allow you a little bit of escape from those incredible lows chemically, and allow you to just see that your situation doesn't have to dictate how you feel. But obviously you speak to a doctor before going on those. In close relation to what I just mentioned there, find a supportive community, people that actually make you feel good. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people. When we consider all of the individual relationships we have, there are individuals that you'll probably find you feel slightly more comfortable around. Try to prioritize spending time with those people. And the ones that make you feel more anxious, maybe spend a little bit less time with. And as soon as you start to grow a little bit more in confidence, then you can reassess that and revisit that and start to deal with the people that make you uncomfortable a little bit more. But find people that share hobbies, beliefs, even people that feel the same sorts of anxieties that you do. This is really important. Manageably dosing discomfort. I would never advocate completely going away from all the things that make you feel uncomfortable. It's really important as people that we do tackle the things that make us uncomfortable sometimes, but in manageable doses. So my example was the one-on-ones. I just had this deep irrational fear of meeting with people one-on-one. And in university, I actually started confronting that. And so what I'd do is I'd force myself to actually organize a one-on-one. I'd go and sit there. I would try my best to be as unawkward as possible. And then afterwards, I would very, very quickly record the positives of that experience so that I could reinforce them later. I'd make sure that I wrote down only the positive things that I felt that I'd done well, and then I'll try and emulate them the next time and the next time. And now I don't any longer fear that one-on-one contact because of it. So this is also related to that, but there's more psychology here. So reinforce the random positive experiences that you have. In your day-to-day with anxiety, you'll find that there will be moments with people that you'll, for whatever reason, feel more positive. And as quickly as you can, record why it is, what was the context, what were you doing that made you feel better, and try to make a consistent record of that. When I was on exchange, I used to wake up very early. I mean, no, sorry, very late, just before classes. And I'd run to the dining hall, and there was no breakfast because I was so late. And every day I'd grab 2 handfuls of cranberries off the table. For whatever reason, they were very bougie and had dried cranberries that you could grab in the morning. But I'd grab 2 handfuls, I'd stuff my pockets, and throughout the day I'd be eating cranberries. And after returning to South Africa, I started slipping back into anxiety and stuff after exchange. And for whatever reason, I had cranberries one day, and I realized that it just brought all of the confidence that I had on exchange back. Um, and I actually started carrying around a little bag of cranberries whenever I was doing something stressful. Whenever I felt like I needed an extra boost of confidence, I'd carry them with me and I'd eat them. When I interviewed for Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, I had a bag of cranberries in my pocket, and I consumed them. And I believe strongly to this day that it really helped me to perform how I did in those interviews and actually get into the foundation. And so I'm biased towards treats, but find something that you associate with positivity. And if you keep it on your person, it can be a real lifesaver when you're feeling particularly down. And then the last point, and I think the most important point, is reflect and celebrate your progress. At any one moment, as an anxious person, you'll feel like you're fluctuating. It can feel very dark and very desperate at certain moments, but the most important thing is your trajectory. If you reflect on the past months and you see that you're experiencing less anxiety before, if you feel like you're socializing slightly better with people, you're moving in the right direction, and it's a step forward and a really positive thing. And the most universal way of reflecting on this is through journaling. I wrote a journal entry immediately after exchange, which I've referred to years later, which has given me a huge source of strength. And another thing for me was art. This is my matric art final. And it was my narrative of really tackling my identity, breaking free from what I thought was the scrutiny of other people, and really growing into the person that I thought that I could become. And it was an immense healing process for me. And another way of healing is also just sharing your experience with other people. If you see people that you think are suffering more than you are, to just give the little tips that have helped you, even if they're incredibly small, it can help you heal in a massive way and help them along their journey. And yeah, there are other hobbies that you could have that could be really good for reflecting and celebrating progress. That could include things like hiking or meditation or other things that you enjoy, music. But there are countless things that can provide that reflection. So in closing, I have 2 points. And I think these are really important points. The first is that I don't regret having gone through what I went through. I've passed it now. I have very minor anxiety now. I love connecting with people, but I don't regret the fact that I suffered from pretty severe anxiety. When I turned 21, my dad wrote me a letter, and in the letter he paraphrased one of his favorite poets, Khalil Gibran. And this man, this Lebanese guy, wrote about the fact that the heights of your joy are measured by the depths of your sorrow. And essentially what that was saying is that we are only as happy as the context of sadness makes us. And so I think it's really important in life to overcome personal struggles and to move forward and to really feel proud about those personal struggles. I feel more proud about the progress that I've made in terms of social anxiety than I do about anything that I've achieved. And then the second point is also a really important one. Overcoming social anxiety is a journey. You're not going to wake up one day and feel a huge amount better than you did the previous day. You really have to put in a lot of effort and a lot of really exhausting effort at times to get there, but it is possible. Know that it is possible. I wish that when I was younger, when I'd asked that question, I wish that someone had given me the hope to say that there is a destination where you will actually feel really comfortable around the people that you love. And so I'm sharing that message today. I hope that I can be a bit of an example to people that that struggle with these things. I'm through it. I've managed to get there. I've kind of forged the way. And I hope that if you are out there and you're struggling with these sorts of things, that you carry on with this really, really tough fight and you'll get there to the same place in the end. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you to this week's Life Learner. Please stay tuned for our next video.